Hey everybody, this is Javi, and you are watching the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. Welcome and hello. Today, this is the very first episode of For Your Information. Is basically like a weekly segment, a weekly segment where we're going to be sharing tools and tips on how to not only better yourself and connect to yourself, but also to connect with your inner child and all your inner selves. To be honest with you, so for those who don't know me or are just now finding this channel, I'm a psychic, intuitive medium, and author who specializes in inner child therapy. I put a strong emphasis, at least the way I work, is that I put a strong emphasis on um, generational trauma and historical trauma and how it affects us as children. I also talk about the archetypes and how we adopt and internalize a lot of those archetypes to fill a role within the family unit. And also I talk about rewriting, the subconscious mind, rewriting those stories, unlearning a lot of the stories that that focuses on the negative parts of the self, in order for us to move forward, right? And so this is just another a way for me to, give you some tools and tips, share tools and tips with you, and to help you better understand, how the mind works, how we work, and how we can unlearn those things. So this is just another way for me to do it. Not only will we be pulling recaps from the podcast of things that we already talked about, but also be adding new information as well. So please stay tuned every week for your information. So as you can see today, we are going to be talking about how to connect with your inner wounded child. And so let's go ahead and get started with this, right? So what is the wounded child? The wounded child is the childlike version of us that energetically carries the wounds from our trauma. So that's basically what the wounded child does. Like it's the part of us, especially if we have internalized that archetype. That's the one that carries the wounds of everything that's happened, whether it be outside of us or within us. It's also the archetype that adopts and that we adopt and internalize as a result of not getting justice for the trauma we've experienced. The wounded child plays the role of the family historian. We are the ones who see everything that happens in the family, and we are also the ones that are more likely to stay silent about it because we know we don't feel safe telling those stories to anyone, what we've witnessed, without being punished for it. All right, so the wounded child also keeps the family secrets that perpetuate the cycle of trauma within the family. And often we are the ones who are angry and hurt due to the lack of justice as a result of being forced to contain these secrets during childhood. So the wounds and the stories behind them are living in silence, right? Children who internalize the wounded child archetype is unable to speak about their pain due to the lack of support, the fear of retaliation, and not having the language to express how they feel. So basically, the the brain plays a huge part in how we communicate with the world, and when trauma interferes with that form of communication, sometimes we don't have the language, or we no longer have the language to express how we feel when something is happening. So what's happening what happens with that is that we're unable to speak about our pain. We're not able to speak about our pain or to communicate with our pain effectively, which is why there's a lot of emotion dysregulation. Okay. So the result of not being able to, express ourselves, or we don't have the support, or we fear retaliation if we are to disclose the abuse in any way, shape, or form, or to tell our story in any way, shape, or form, is that the wounded child holds on to the trauma stories over time. We accumulate all these stories that happen to us, and when they're not if and they all have that an energy, and so when that story does not leave us, we're still holding on to the energy of that story. It's still stored within us, and so we end up holding on to those stories, um what basically feeling as if we're not going to be able to tell them. They continuously feel ignored and unheard, which makes them react from an unconscious, subconscious level. Those stories, because they're stored within us, they're going to come out eventually. They're going to come out sideways. So a lot of the time, they're stored unconsciously within our mind. They're stored within our bodies. All those stories are stored within the minds of the wounded child. And they start to come out sideways in our behavior, in the way we treat people, in the way we view the world, stuff like that. And so as a result of that, of those stories coming out sideways, my the wounded child has a tendency to reenact the stories they've been holding on to throughout their adult life. And so those who've internalized the wounded child archetype often have issues with emotion dysregulation, as I said before, intense anger or sadness that's often the baseline emotion, right? So there's often intense sadness or intense rage, um, because of the stories that are sitting within us, and also because of that injustice that we feel in regards to our abuse and people not stepping up to do anything about it. So it stems from the feelings of injustice that prevalent is very prevalent among those who are suffering from historical and generational trauma. It also stems from that fear of retaliation. As I said before, a lot of wounded children, a lot of abused children have a tendency to not disclose the abuse due to that fear of retaliation or losing, like basically losing something. Like that retaliation can come in like many different forms. That fear of retaliation can come in the form of having love, or your emotions being shut down, or someone withholding emotional support from you, or some being hit, or losing a resource is very important to you. So those are just examples of retaliation. And so we consciously reenact the trauma because the energy has to go somewhere, right? So we end up reenacting the abuse because that's what we're used to. So we interact with people, places, and situations that remind us or is similar to the trauma. And this also gives us the opportunity to get the justice we did not get as children. This gives us the opportunity um, to express the intense anger or the intense sadness within us, even if the people, places, or situations have nothing to do with what happened. Okay, we have the tendency to um, reenact it in some way, shape, or form. You know, and sometimes we get into relationships as well that remind us of the abuse or the abuser, right? We end up getting into a lot of relationships and getting into a lot of situations that remind us of the abuse as well, or like gives us the opportunity to reenact it. So here are the solutions, in regarding to reparenting your inner child, so your inner wounded child, because in order for you to let go of those stories and to let go of the anger and the sadness, regarding injustice, you are to reparent your own inner wounded child, because this is it's just really good for your relationships with yourself and with your inner child. And also it gives you the opportunity to tell your own story in a way that's authentic to you, and you're not so focused on the injustice part of it. You're giving yourself that sense of justice by telling your own story and healing and reparenting your wounded child, and giving them the opportunity to tell the story that they were not able to tell anyone else. So here's some tools and tips in regards to like reparenting your inner child. Assure your inner wounded child that you, the adult, are a safe person, because there's a lot of distrust that is accumulated over time, because a inner wounded child has a tendency to want to tell their story and may be able to tell their story, but have been shut down by people, mainly adults, you know, who had their trust beforehand. And so over time, when that injustice plays a role, or that sense of injustice plays a role in the child's life, you know, what ends up happening is that they turn into an adult that does not trust other people. They feel like they have to do it themselves. So assure that wounded child, that inner wounded child, that you are a safe person, that you are not here to shut them down or to shut them up. Also assure them that their story is going to be heard. So when the wounded child feels heard, they feel validated. One of the reasons why a lot of wounded children are angry as adults is because they feel like they for one, they now have the power to speak up for themselves, and two, they feel like there's no one is listening to them when they do speak. And so this is a time for us to like really listen to that inner child and to make sure their story is heard, to to earn that trust from them, right? And again, this is establishing trust. It will allow them to open up to you, right, as an adult. Allow the shadow emotions to emerge and be felt, and also show them through your own healing that another world is possible. Let me go back to the shadow emotions. Let them know that they are allowed to be angry, they are allowed to be sad, they are allowed to be disappointed, they're allowed to be happy, they are allowed to show the wide range of their emotions, because when they were growing up they were not allowed to do so. They had to shut down and shut up out of mere survival. And so this is your opportunity to tell your inner child they can feel however they want to feel and express it however they see fit within reason. Just because they're angry and you're allowing them to, you know, express their shadow emotions does not mean that they are not to have boundaries, but also let them know that they are safe and they have the room to to express themselves to the fullest. Um, and then like show them through your own healing that another world is possible, because they're not able to see, the wounded child is not able to see a world outside of chaos. You are to give them the opportunity um, to realize that, like, or you're to help them realize that there is another world without chaos. There's another world without trauma and living and reliving a trauma story. They hold on to the story anyway due to that lack of injustice. They hang on to that story because they feel like someone has to remember, because everyone else has forgotten, and someone is going to pay for what happened to them. But it's basically like them drinking their own poison by holding on to that story. So basically, let your inner child know, your inner wounded child know that there is another world possible. There's another way for you, to the both of you rather, um, to live a better life. And one of them is to not tell them that they do not have to hold on to the story any longer. Okay, and that you have the power. You and your inner child have the power to recreate a new reality outside of the trauma. It's okay for you to show them a better way. Show them a better way by spending time with them. Show them a better way of telling them what your life is like, um, now in the here and now. Tell them what it's like. Tell them that it's safe for them to come out and to realize and recognize their potential. And that it's okay for them to be angry. It's okay for them to be sad. It's okay for them to be it's okay for them to be that way. Um, but it's also okay for them to realize that they have the power to recreate a new reality. Okay, this is a time for you to sit down with your inner child, tap into that energy, and tell them that because you are doing the healing work, this is what our life is going to look like. This is what our life is going to be like. You have the power to have a say so in this, because in the wounded children have no say so, or feel as if they have no say so in their own agency. So it's very important that you let them know and realize and internalize the fact that they have the power to recreate a new reality for themselves outside of trauma, and also to release the old story and to create a new one. Create a new story. They have the power to create a new story, to create a new reality. In fact, that is the only way they're going to be able to create a new reality is by letting go of the old one. Okay, the trauma that they went through, you're no longer going through that. You now, as an adult, you now have the power to get out of that situation. You have the power to recreate your reality, and one way to do that is by unlearning a lot of the messages that you have received about your storytelling, around your storytelling, and around the power of your words. And so, another way to do this is by allowing, you know, your inner child to tell the story in order to release it. Okay, but first and foremost, and the most important, is that you are to be patient. Be patient with yourself and your inner wounded child. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a long time for you to undo and unwrap those stories, unpack those stories that you have told, that they've held on to, and internalized as the truth, and their only reality. Right. So be patient with yourself and your inner child, um, because it takes so long to unlearn those stories. So and as long as you are doing the work necessary, you are going to relearn another another reality. You're going to relearn, a new way of thinking. All of that takes time. So please do not be hard on yourself if things don't, change for you right away. So, thank you so much for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. For more information about the wounded inner child, you can check out the Inner Child Collective podcast video or the audio entitled "Reparenting Your Inner Child." Also, if you can go to these particular sites to listen to the audio version, Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Public Radio, Spotify, and, or wherever you go to listen to the podcast. And also, be sure to review. The more I know about what you're thinking, the better. And it's just another way for me to spread the message about the podcast, about inner child therapy. So just want to let y'all know that. And so thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you and your energy. And I will see you next week. Until next time, peace.